Hi, this is Euphoria the Digital Reader, and this is another installment of my BookLife collection where I talk about the books I added to my collection and also where I talk about the books that I read. For the books I added to my collection, I'm kind of mixing this up a bit. I'm going to talk about where I got them from, how much I paid for them. Since I'm moving more to DRM-free books and DRM-free sites, I just thought it might be good for y'all to see where I'm getting my books from. And also for the books I read, I'll talk briefly about them. I don't really like to give plots of books because I feel like once you give the whole plot of the book, then why are you reading it? Especially if it's books that have some surprises in the plots. So I kind of give an overall synopsis of the book, and my hope is that if you like what I like, then you can go off the stars of the book to give it a shot, rather than hear the whole plot and decide if you're into that or not. And I'll also kind of close with anything book or digital reading wise that I may want to throw in that I did during the previous month that I'm working on or thinking about. I'm a big fan of older pulp books. So another bookttuber who talks about older pulp books is the Sleepy Book Reader. I'll include his link in the description, but he has a lot of taste that I do as far as older pulp books. And one of the books that he recommended was Transit to Scorpio by Burt Akers. And it's basically a John Carter Warlord of Mars knockoff. It's the first book of the Dray Prescot series, which is kind of a mix of sword and sorcery and science fiction, kind of all mixed into one. It follows the story of Dray Prescot, who is this British naval officer who gets mysteriously transported to the planet Cregan, orbiting the star Antares in the Scorpio constellation. So I saw this book, and it's definitely a book that interested me, so I picked it up. So I've heard a lot of good things and a lot of recommendations from booktubers I like about the book Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. I don't really know a ton about the book, but based off YouTubers like Kalila, is one of my favorite booktubers. She liked it, so I figured I'd give it a shot. Quickly, at least reading the blurb. Orphaned and expendable, Alina Starkov is a soldier who knows she may not survive her first trek across the Shadowfold, a swath of unnatural darkness crawling with monsters. But when her regiment is attacked, Alina unleashes dormant magic not even she knew she possessed. Now Alina will enter a lavish world of royalty and intrigue as she trains with the Grisha, her country's magical military elite, and falls under the spell of their notorious leader, the Darkling. He believes Alina can summon a force capable of destroying the Shadowfold and reuniting their war-ravaged country, but only if she can master her untamed gift. Sounds good. So I figured I'd go ahead and pick it up. I also picked up Lich Queen by Naomi Clark. I picked this up when I was doing my overview of Evernight Publishing. Whenever I do an overview of any DRM-free publisher, I always buy a book. Last year, I didn't include the books I bought from those publishers just because I felt like that was part of the job. This year, I think I'm going to go ahead and include those books, and just so I can also, in my list, highlight where I got them from, and then I can kind of talk about them, after I read them. So the books I do buy, if you know, I do my TBR once a year, and with my TBR, I basically give myself 6 wild cards that I could add anytime during the year. Just because I buy a book doesn't mean it's going to make it into my 6 wild cards. This probably won't. Just the story of it is kind of a romance book. Evernight Publishing is basically a romance publisher, and the blurb is magic has ruined Detective Dawn Hardy's life. Her partner is dead, her career is on the rocks, and Dawn fears she herself may no longer be human. While she struggles with the aftermath of a vampire attack, dead bodies are going missing around Fort Rosser. A demonic plot is brewing, and Dawn and her friends may be the only ones who can stop it, if they can stop fighting each other, and if Dawn can conquer the growing darkness inside herself. Vampires and demons were just the beginning. I picked this book up. Evernight Publishing has kind of a rating as to how spicy a book is from, I believe, 1 to 5. This is a spice rating of 1. That's pretty much all I could handle. But it was something that looked kind of interesting. I figured I'd give it a shot. So this is the book I got from Evernight Publishing.
And now for the books that I read last month.
Burn Baby Burn is the second in a trilogy of superhero stories by James Maxey. The first is Nobody Gets the Girl, and it's about a character whose superpower is that he doesn't exist, and that because he doesn't exist, people often forget about him if they're not like directly engaged with him. So he joins these other two superheroines, and there's this huge fight that they have in a city where they basically almost destroy the city, and hijinks ensue. The first book, what happens is at the end of the first book, some main characters die, and the villains who these heroes were fighting, nobody knows their fate. In this book, Burn Baby Burn, two of the villains who everybody thought died, Sundancer and Pit Geek, they survive, and this story is kind of about them figuring out what to do on their own when they don't have like a mastermind or a leader behind them, because they're both definitely flawed characters. That's why they're villains. And this story kind of follows their journey. It talks a little bit about their origin and how they got to where they are, and it also brings some heroes back into the fold that they interact with who are flawed heroes, in that they're heroes, but their reasons for being heroes aren't what we consider the usual genuine motivations to be heroes. I really enjoyed this book. I am, of course, a fan of superhero fiction. I like this book, but I will have to say this trilogy is not a superhero fiction trilogy I would recommend to somebody who is new to superhero fiction, mainly because it is kind of dark, it is kind of depressing, but the stories and the characters are just really great, and that's really the main part of Burn Baby Burn, is Sundancer's story, but more importantly, Pit Geek, who is basically, Sundancer has fire powers, and Pit Geek is he is kind of like a zombie who can eat anything. But Pit Geek's story is just really the main thrust of the book. It's just such a good story that I really like the characters. I really like the story. It wasn't so much about superheroes flying around and fighting. It's both of James Maxey's, both of his books, Nobody Gets the Girl, the first book of the trilogy, and Burn Baby Burn, which is the one I'm talking about, which is the second book. He really focuses on characters and interactions between people. There are some superhero fights and stuff, but that's a small part of what he's writing about. He really is just focusing on how people deal with these powers, how they were brought to these powers, and what effect these powers have on them. This was a book I really enjoyed, although it was a bit dark, so I'm going to be giving it 4 stars. When Death Comes Stealing by Valerie Wilson Wesley is a classic detective noir, updated, where the main character, the detective, is a black female from New Jersey. The story is about her ex-husband comes back into her life. They broke up because he cheated on her, and he's got several baby mamas throughout his life. He married her when she was young, and he was older, and he's had a lot of women and a lot of kids. And he comes to her because somebody's been killing his sons. So she goes to look into it. Most of the deaths seem pretty plausible, but as she looks deeper into it, she finds more about it and realizes that somebody has been doing it intentionally and basically creating situations to make it look like accidents or suicides or blaming the murders on somebody else. This is a classic detective noir as far as its presentation and the plot. And in reading this book, it was a good book, but I kind of realized after reading this book, I'm just not a fan of detective noir. Detective noir books all seem to me kind of formulaic. They all have to follow this formula where this hero is this, tough, hard-shelled person with a soft inside. And then they have this person who kind of gets to them. The mystery itself, once again, it was good, but for a person who's watched a lifetime of detective TV, I kind of knew pretty quickly, or at least I kind of guessed pretty quickly who the person was. Wasn't bad. I think if you like detective noir, you'll definitely like this. I think if you want some diversity in your detective stories, then I think you'll like this. I really roasted The Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler, and now I kind of regret it a little bit because I just think these just aren't my thing. I would definitely recommend it to some people who like that kind of stuff, and there are tons of books like this out there that are very successful. So this was a good book, a bit formulaic, but that's what people expect in these kind of books, I think. So I'm going to go ahead and give it 3 stars. Gorgon Child by Stephen Barnes is the second book in a trilogy of books about a main character named Aubrey Childs. The first book, Street Lethal, I was a huge fan of. I read it about 25 years ago or so, and I loved that book. I've recently, I guess about a year ago, I found out that there was 2 other books and that it was a trilogy. So I was absolutely like, oh, great, let me get these other 2 books. So I read Gorgon Child, and the story of Street Lethal, briefly, is that Aubrey Childs was a high-level 0G boxer. This story takes place in a dystopian future where the United States is fragmented. The West Coast has been hit with the earthquake that everybody's always talking about, and people are dealing with that aftermath. And it's kind of built in technology and genetics is just starting to reach that stage where we would call it futuristic. So he was a big name in 0G boxing, but he got framed for murder and he went to jail. Once he gets out of jail, he gets into situations with a gang that he used to run with before he went to jail, and they collide. And in that collision, he basically has to fight these matches and show his fighting skill. And it's really about kind of like almost like a roadhousey kind of vibe where he's constantly fighting to prove himself against this gang and these people. I really loved that book at the time, and when I read Gorgon Child, I was definitely expecting more of the same. In the book Gorgon Child, Aubrey Knight is still a wanted criminal and still on the run, but he's working with some scavengers in Los Angeles, and he's hiding his identity, and he's kind of become their de facto leader. Things happen there, and he has to leave, and then some of the characters in the book, who I guess I'm going to go with the word evil, they have a vendetta against Aubrey, and they send some special assassins to take care of some business in a safe haven that he's hiding in. Hijinks, of course, ensue, and he has to fight his way out of it. For me, there were a couple big issues I had with Gorgon Child. The first is I read Street Lethal 25-ish years ago, and I realized that 25-ish years ago, we were just used to heroes who were hyper macho, a little bit misogynistic, a little bit homophobic. That was just kind of like what they all were, whether it was Arnold Schwarzenegger or whether it was Lethal Weapon with, the heroes of that day. That was just par for the course. Now, 25 years later, if a person's going to be like that, I kind of need to know more about why they're like that. So the hero wasn't as exciting to me as he used to be because now I'm a different person. The other problem I had is in the first book, it focused on Aubrey Knight and Los Angeles. And in that smaller scope of dystopian Los Angeles, it was good. I enjoyed it. In the second book, Gorgon Child, he kind of expands his world to be bigger. And I just feel like the world he creates that's bigger than Los Angeles felt a little uneven. Some of the characters, I just was like, ugh, okay. How best can I put it? There were things he wrote that I felt sometimes writers will do things that they feel that are shocking for shock's sake. And there are things he did in this book that I felt were shocking for shock's sake, in that some of his takes on homosexuality, some of his takes on sexual violence, they didn't seem to have a reason to be in the book so that I would say, okay, I get it. So for example, the sexual violence in The Color Purple, there's an absolute payoff because it is integral to the whole characters, to many of the characters in the book, who they are, how they act, how they overcome things. I felt like some of the homophobia, some of the sexual violence, it just didn't really, it was hard for me to see what he was trying to say, other than he was just throwing it out there because he wanted to. So that brought it down a bit. Still, when he shrank his focus a bit and got more to action and adventure and our hero doing things, those were just as good as the first book. So this book, I have to admit, I was disappointed in the world. I wasn't as enamored with the lead character as I used to be because, like I said, those type of characters, those type of heroes just aren't as popular anymore, and they just don't interest me as much anymore. I mean, I'm a big fan of Lady Sherlock now. I don't even know if I would have read that book 25 years ago. So I think it's a good book, but you just have to realize it's a book from 1986. And I also think it's definitely a book that has its flaws. Not knocking that. I mean, there are tons of incredibly famous books and book series that have their flaws. I mean, Doc Savage, I love Doc Savage. It definitely has its flaws. So, all that to be said, I would say I'm going to give this book 3 stars, mainly because after reading this book, I'm not really dying to read the third book in the series. I'm kind of like, I get it. I'm good. I'm also kind of like looking at his world and thinking, you're probably just going to get even more crazy in the third book, and I don't know if I'm up for it. And the character, I don't know, he doesn't feel like the character is going to have any real growth in the third book. So I definitely at some point will read the third book to complete the trilogy, but it's not a book that I'm thinking about reading immediately or soon. Whenever I talk about 3-star books, the first thing that pops into my mind is I rate a book 3 stars if my first thought is there are definitely better books I could be reading. And once I read those better books, then maybe I'll circle back to this 3-star book. And that's exactly how I feel about this book. So I give Gorgon Child by Stephen Barnes 3 stars. Hot Dog Money by Guy Lawson is a story about Louis Martin Blazer, or as most people called him, Marty Blazer. He started his career as a financial consultant, and he wanted to be a financial consultant to athletes. What he ended up doing is he ended up paying prospective football stars he met and connected with in college, and he began to pay for them to pay their way in the hopes that when they eventually went pro, they would hire him as a financial consultant. And his plan worked. He was making good money. He was living a high lifestyle. He would use the money he made to go back to other prospective football stars and then pay them and take them on vacations and get them women and stuff, money and stuff like that. And what happened is all that worked out. He was living the high life, but then hijinks ensued in his life and he began embezzling from his clients. When he was embezzling from his clients, he eventually got caught by the FBI, and the FBI turns him into an informant. And this story is about his work with the FBI as an informant to basically reach out to basketball coaches. They switched him over to basketball, reach out to basketball coaches, and those coaches would get paid, and then they would bribe basketball players for kind of the same scheme. That he would pay the coaches would take some off the top, and then the coaches would then bribe the basketball players. They'd give them money to attend certain schools. They'd give them money so that when they eventually became pros, they would hopefully use Marty as their financial advisor, and hopefully they would pick certain agents. This is a very good story. What I really liked about this story is that the main character of this story, it's not really a story, it's a true tale. The character Marty is basically a crook, and I like reading it because he doesn't see himself as a crook, but when you read the book, you're like, yeah, dude, you're a crook. You don't realize it. So the portrayal of that guy is really good by the writer guy Lawson, and I feel like he really has this picture where this guy thinks he hasn't done anything wrong. He thinks other people doing it are wrong. I really enjoyed the story, and I kind of enjoyed not so much intrigue, but I was a big sports fan, and so I kind of like hearing about all the sports stuff. So anyway, I enjoyed this book. I'm giving it 4 stars. So miscellaneous stuff. Next, for the month of March, I'm gonna go ahead and do my first installment of my battery life challenges. Usually I'm gonna go in order of the e-readers I use the most, and the e-reader I hands down use the most is the Pocketbook Inkpad 3 Color. So that will be the first one. It's interesting to do the battery life challenges because one thing I'm quickly learning is the results vary greatly based off of how long your reading sessions are. So with e-readers, the thing that uses the most energy is when you power them on and off when they're syncing to the cloud to kind of sync the library. That uses the most power. So I found that reading in short sessions is a real drain on the battery. If I'm reading like a half hour and then a day later I read another half hour, or during one day I read 4 times for 15 minutes, that's a huge drain on the battery, versus if once a day I read for an hour straight and then the next day I read for an hour straight. It just makes a big difference in the battery. So generally what I'm going to be giving is the best representation of the battery life based on reading for a solid hour once a day. The other thing that I did in February is I picked up 2 new e-readers that at some point I'll be talking about or even giving a review. I got the Books Page, which is basically the black and white version of the Books Go Color 7. I'm kind of over Kaleido 3. I have 2 color e-readers, and honestly, I'm starting to feel like, as far as my reading experience, I actually like the current generation of black and white e-readers better. Not knocking color e-readers, but I feel like going forward, I'll wait to see what new technologies come up for color e-readers. But for right now, any future e-readers I get, if they're using e-ink technology in the current generation, are just going to be black and white. So I got the books page, and I'll talk about that, like I said, at some point. And I also got, this isn't new, but I couldn't help myself. With all this Amazon craziness going on, I picked up another Kindle. I actually got a third generation Kindle. The main reason why I got the third generation Kindle is I want to do some tests on some of the Kindle stuff I've downloaded and I haven't taken the DRM out of. Also, I got a good deal on it, and it has a brand new battery. So it cost me like $59, and the person has a brand new battery put in there. So I'll talk about that, and of course do that as part of my my battery life challenge series at some point. So anything else I can think of? No, that's about all I can think of that was really of note to me in that happened to me in February.